Okay, so I need everybody to look at our website, Canvas site, really quickly, just to get some brief idea about what's going on today and what the assignments for this upcoming week are. So the important one is this assignment 2.1. And again, remember the way I do my assignments, the naming convention, it's always the first number in it is the session or the week that we're in, and the second number is which assignment within that week. So again, 2.1 is the first assignment for week number 2, 2.2 is the second assignment, 2.3 is the third assignment for week 2, blah, blah, blah. Okay, if you take a look at the resources in here, there's a number of things that I want you to actually read through. We're going to get through smart objects, processing in camera raw. This color theory, it's well, I'm going to click on it. I don't know how many pages it is. I don't necessarily expect you to get through the entire color theory primer in one sitting. Yeah, it's 31 pages long. So take your time on that one, digest it slowly. I am going to try to get through as much color theory as I can over the course of this class. It's an amazing resource. The one thing else that I will say to you about all of this is that for my money, you would be really well served by simply downloading all these PDFs. You then will have them forever. You can go and refer to them back again if you need to, whatever. Some of it you will refer to, some of it you won't. I'm just throwing it out there as an option for you. It's a resource that you might as well not let go to waste. And then anyway, but the part that I did want to talk about specifically right now is the assignment 2.1. So if you click on this, what assignment 2.1 says is that basically you are to take the images that you made, that you've just had this feedback from, and you are to take your DSLR camera and you are to go out and rephotograph. So that doesn't necessarily, I'm not asking you to go make the same identical picture that you made on your phone. What I'm asking you to do is take the images that you did shoot on your phone as a jumping off point. And can you go out and make that better? Can you make that more interesting? Looking at those pictures, what can you anticipate about that? Did you do it at the best time of the day? If you had done it at a different time of the day, would that have made a difference? Was your situation too contrasty? So maybe you could have taken a bed sheet out there and used it as a reflector to open up your shadows. Maybe you want to take a flash on camera to use it as a fill flash. There's all sorts of things. Maybe you want to take a tripod and do an exposure that's 2 hours long. There's a whole cornucopia of things that you could do that are not simply recaptures of exactly what you captured with your phone, but they're the things that I want you to think about. I want this to be conscious in your mind before you go out. How can I make this better? What can I do that is different? There's a list of things here that I would like you to consider in this, but this list should be, this is what I should have tattooed on my ass. I've been looking for a tattoo for like years, and I could never come up with something that wanted to be that permanent. But this list, come on. Light, vantage point, composition, and structure, it's all there in front of you. So at any rate, yeah, I know, all right? Okay. How funny would that be, right? Or wait, I could do two mirrors. I could do the one mirror that would take it and then another one. Never mind. Okay, so at any rate, so what I am looking for and what we will ultimately then deal with next week. So if you continue down here and read this assignment. So what I'm asking you to do is to return to your location. I'm asking you now to narrow it down. You're giving me your top 20 picks tonight, but I want you to cut that in half. I want at the end of this to be 10 images. That's where we're going to finish up with for this part right now. So anyway, I need you to make these compelling and interesting as you possibly can. These are going to be the final images for this assignment. You will import those images into Lightroom. From that list of 10 that you reshoot, I want you to do your top 5 picks. Your top 5 picks we are actually going to print out, and I'm going to get layered Photoshop files from you, which will make more sense when we get through the rest of tonight. Does that sort of make sense? So for next week, what's going to happen is that from your top 5 picks, you're going to export each one of those 5 into Photoshop, and you are going to save it as a Smart Object Photoshop file. How many people in this room know what a Smart Object is? That's a good thing, because then you're not going to be off I don't need to correct any bad habits. So at any rate, that's fine. You'll know what a smart object is before the end of tonight. The naming convention is exactly the same. And then so for next week, you would simply bring a hard drive. What you will turn in next week are those 5 layered Photoshop files. We are not going to do final prints because next week we're actually going to learn how to print out of Photoshop. So next week we've got the print lab by and large reserved for us at night. So what I do need you to do is to bring in some printing paper to actually work on, because what I would love to do is to spend the first half of our class talking about the ins and outs and the best way to actually be printing. And then the second part of it, I would actually like to get you in the print lab actually physically printing these images. Next week, the prints for these are not due, but the following week, we will look at your 5 prints. That is what will go up on the board. That is what will be critiqued. It will be our first big, full-blown class critique thing. Does that make sense? Yes.
Do you have detailed, like, what kind of paper?
What I would suggest you do, only because these things are set up to work with them, is make it any Epson paper at all. I don't care how big it is. Usually an 8x10 would be good. What the lab has been normally recommending is their premium presentation luster. But if you're a person who loves glossy and you want to do them glossy, fine. If you want to do their enhanced matte, that's another fine candidate. If you guys want to get together and split a pack of paper, that's fine as well. The only reason I say this is that maybe next, I'm going to try to show you guys how to do custom profiles, which will allow you to then legitimately, in a color managed way, print on any third-party paper on those printers or any printer that you want to print on. So if you're a person who loves Red River Enhanced Matte and you've never really been able to get a decent print on it, I'm going to show you the third and final step in this whole calibration, profiling, workflow, color managed workflow that we've got. But for the time being right now, I know for certain that the Epson profiles exist on those printers, so it'll just be a less frustrating experience to begin with. Make sense? Okay, other questions? Okay, so with that being said, just check and see if there's anything else in here that I'm worried about for next week. Nope. The rest of this part will actually be fine. So we're going to spend the next half an hour jumping into Photoshop. We'll take a break and then come back and we will continue to work in Photoshop. We'll get through as much of this as we possibly can. So I know I asked this question. Go ahead and start Photoshop up on your computer if you would, please. So I know we started this conversation last week when everybody did their sort of intro part. I specifically asked you guys your level of Photoshop skills. Did we have that conversation? Okay, and you would think I would have remembered all of that or written it down. I don't remember any of that. So what I need to do is really quickly get another sort of snapshot of where you guys are in your Photoshop experience, okay? So if we look at a scale of 1 to 5, 1, you know how to open Photoshop, but that's all you've ever done. You've never really opened a file in it. 5, you are so good at Photoshop, you can do anything. So, how many people in this room would say they're a 5? Okay, how many are a 4? That's good. How many are a 3? Okay, how many are a 2? A lot of 2s. How many are a 1? Okay, nope, fine. Okay, so for the 1s in here, can you give me a little bit better idea when we say you've opened Photoshop before? Have you ever opened a file in Photoshop or no? Okay, that's fine. No, Liz, same thing?
Yeah, I've printed from Photoshop.
Oh, okay, so you have a little more experience than that. Okay, all right, okay. So that gives me some idea. Okay, so with Photoshop fired up, when you guys are looking at my screen, some of you on your screens have exactly what my screen looks like, but a lot of you probably don't. What's yours look like? Yeah, so that's interesting. Does everybody's screen look like this? The layout on your screen? Yeah, that's what I think most people should probably have here in the beginning. So I'm going to get us started. But this is actually my retouching workspace. That's why this thing exists. But it's not typically what you'll run into when you actually start Photoshop up. So to get to the thing that most people see when they start Photoshop, I want everybody to come up to the window menu, come down to Workspace. So look up at my screen to see where I'm at right here, and come down to this thing that says Essentials Default. You click on that. That is only half of a two-step process. Whenever you change workspaces, it's a two-step process. That's the first half. The second half is you go right back to the very same place, up to the window menu, down to Workspace, and come down to Reset. Now, what it says after Reset will change depending on what you've picked here. So, for instance, if I had picked Photography instead of Essentials, this would say Reset Photography. But because we picked Essentials, it's going to say Reset Essentials, and you let go, and this is basically the default workspace that you get into with Photoshop. So there's a couple of things in here that we are going to change because I don't like the way they are. To change them, we are gonna well, first I'm gonna change a couple things first, guys, and then we'll do a quick tour of what's going on around here. So the first thing that I want to get rid of are these little icons that are sitting right here. To get rid of them, if you come over to the first one, the one that looks like it's got a little it's three little squares with an arrow, if you click on that, it will fly out and you will get these things. By the way, are called palettes. So this is the history palette right here. If you come over and you actually click and drag the name history, you can tear the palette off and let go. We're going to come to the next one as well. It's the one that's called Properties. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to click to open it up. Then we're going to click on the name Property, and we are going to tear that one off as well. And it gets rid of the stuff that's actually on this side. Now, I'm going to build you guys are actually going to build my retouching workspace. And the reason I want to do that is it works extremely well for people who are into photography and who are doing Photoshop, photography work in Photoshop. You'll see that all of these other possible spaces in here, they're really designed to do different things. So if you're really into motion or you're really into painting, all it does is it changes which of these palettes that you see and the layout of them. But in my case, I'm going to give you guys what I think are the most important ones, the most important layout, and we're going to go from there. You are welcome to build your own layouts. You are welcome to work with your own layouts. If you hate the working space that I'm going to show you right now, that's fine. You can go back in and build your own or work with one of the pre-canned ones. Are we good on this? Questions on this? Okay, but I think you'll like my workspace because it gives you access to everything. So the next thing we're going to do, this gets a little tricky, so I want everybody to watch my screen to see how this actually works. You need to come up to the window menu right here, and you need to make sure that this application frame is checked. And what the application frame is all about, you'll see, you don't need to do this, but watch my screen right now. When I move my screen, you will see that the original palettes are anchored to this screen, and no matter where I put this guy, it moves the entire workspace. We want to maintain that part, so I want to keep the integrity of the application frame. That's what that whole thing is all about. If the application frame was unchecked, you see that all of that thing goes away and the palettes just float in space. That's not what we want. So anyway, with the application frame checked, if you then, like me, you've now set the entire workspace slightly off. I don't get to really see it completely. There's stuff that's missing down here underneath. If you double click right next to this thing that says Adobe Photoshop, so I want you guys doing this with me. It will help you all stay engaged. It will give you muscle memory and it'll keep you awake. So double click right next to the name that says Adobe and it should jump up and completely repopulate the screen with the largest it possibly can, but still seeing 100% of the workspace. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do, and watch my screen just so that you make sure that you know that this is how this works. I need to dock this property 1 back up into my application frame as another tab in this area. So I've got color and swatches here. I'm going to grab properties, the name. You have to grab the name. You can move the entire palette by clicking just on the top part, but you can't dock this thing doing it that way. So in the Properties palette, I'm going to click and I'm going to drag this up into this space, and I'm still holding it down. You see that blue line that goes around it? That is the indication that I'm in the right place to allow this guy to be docked up into the top and become another tab. And then I'm simply going to let go. So I am going to keep talking now. If something doesn't happen for you, because this always happens, and I might as well warn you guys now, I tend to talk faster and faster and faster. I don't stop. I've got a lot to give you guys information-wise. So if something is not working for you, I'm begging you, scream out, Verser, nope, that didn't work for me. Nope, that's not working for me. Nope, I don't even have Photoshop started. So stop me, okay? It's so much easier to fix something that takes 10 seconds than it is to get you 20 minutes, 30 minutes down the line and so hopelessly lost or unable to do any of the work we're doing because you don't have the tools available to do it. So please, please stop me. Don't be embarrassed by it. Just say, wait, hey, and I'll stop. Okay. So everybody's got properties docked up there, right?
Right.
Okay. So then I need to do a little cleaning here. I'm going to grab the color tab and drag it off. And I'm going to get rid of this guy. Nobody uses it. To get rid of it, there's a little X in the top left-hand corner. You click on that little X and it goes away. I'm going to do the same thing with swatches. I'm going to grab swatches and tear it off. The little X that's at the top, I'm going to click to get rid of that. You'll notice now, though, that properties, by going through all of that maneuver, properties is now docked back into the application frame. And it gets really tricky to do this, so that's why I'm taking these steps through each and every one of you with these guys. So that's where we're at right now. The next thing I'm going to do is take libraries out and get rid of it.
What if you don't have libraries?
If you don't have it, then all the better. Libraries ended up, what libraries is it's a place that's on Adobe servers that you can store things that you commonly use. So you can store colors, and you can store samples of, you can store images, you can store all sorts of things there. But the big thing about libraries is that it's a place for Adobe to sell you stock imagery. And they already have enough of my money, and I resent that, so I don't keep libraries around. So libraries is now gone. I'm going to do the same thing with adjustments. I'm going to grab adjustments and tear this guy off and get rid of it. That leaves me now properties, layers, channels, and paths. I'm going to leave this part. This side is pretty much done. I've got some other stuff over here on the other side, though, that is not done. So there is a missing palette. Oh, by the way, all the palettes that we just got rid of, if you want to bring them back, they're right here under the window menu. So we just got rid of the library earlier. If you wanted it back, you would simply come down here and click on library, and it brings it back for you, and you can put it wherever you want. So it's not like these things are gone forever. You can get any and all of these things back. The next thing that I'm going to get back that I want back is the info palette. So up to window, down to info. And the info palette will come up, and it's, in my case, it's sitting over here on the left, on the right-hand side. Yours may pop up somewhere else. It may even pop up as a tab in here. If it's done any of those things, simply click on the name info and drag it off. And what I want you to do now is, again, not holding down, not moving it by the top of the palette, but by the name info. Come over here next to this thing that's running down here. The long side down here is actually called the toolbar or the tool tab. So we are going to dock this to that. So holding on the name info, come over, and what you'll see is when you get this solid blue line over here that this is now in the correct position to dock, and you will let go. And what you'll see happen is info then takes up the entire, it maps itself to this guy over here, which is fine. However, we need to do on this side, essentially what we're doing on this side over here, we need more palettes to be on this side over here. So the next one we are going to do is we're actually going to put the history one under this guy. So if you take the history, and this is a tricky move right here, guys. If you try to come down here to the bottom, you'll never get it to work. But if you bring the history right under this dark line right here, So look up at my screen to see where I'm at. This is how you dock a palette underneath the info palette, and you let go. Now in this case, we do have a bottom now. The history palette does sit here at the bottom. I'm going to make two other changes in this, and then we're done. So for me, because it's important information that I want to be able to see, I'm actually going to move channels underneath the history palette. To do that, you grab the tab that's called channels, you bring it outside of the palette over here, and then still clicking on the name channels, bring it underneath the history palette, and you'll see you get this blue line on the bottom right now. That will allow you to get this guy underneath history, and you let go. You can resize how much these palettes occupy in space. So for instance, I want to see a little less of my history palette and a little more of my channels. So I'm going to hover over the area where these two palettes meet, and you will see that it changes my cursor to a double-headed arrow. I can click on that and drag up, and it will shrink my history down just a little bit and open up my channels a little bit. And this seems about right to me. I like the way this guy looks. Yeah, I'll tear it out so that it actually looks like this again. So grab channels, but you've got to grab it by the name channels. You can't grab it by the top of the palette window. You've got to be clicking on the tab itself, and then simply bring it down underneath the bottom of history, and you should get that blue line. See or no? And let go, and then again, I'm going to simply resize it so I see a little bit more channels. So they're basically almost even. That's what I'm sort of looking for. So the last thing I'm going to do is back up to the window again, and I'm going to come down and add actions. Action is yet another palette. Now actions by default always ends up joining the history palette tab, which is fine. I want it there. However, I don't want it to be the visible one. I want history to actually be the default visible one, because you spend a lot more time in history than you're going to spend in actions. So I'm going to click on history to make it the visible one. And this is my basic layout that I actually use to do my work in Photoshop. The final thing that I would like you to do is, I think that this palette, the entire group over here, is a little wide, and this is my workspace here in the middle. So to optimize that, I'm going to hover my cursor right over, and you can do it anywhere. It doesn't matter whether you do it on the info palette. I do it in the middle because I don't know, that's where handles should be. But if you click on the area right in the middle, you'll see I'm hovering just over this palette. I get a double-headed arrow that goes left to right. You simply click on this and you shrink this guy down a little bit. Now you'll reach a point that you can't shrink it anymore. That's fine. That's where I'm going to stay at this. That feels right to me on this side over here. I am not going to shrink the other side because you end up with important information over here that I don't want to lose. Now, you would say to yourself, well, that sounds like a lot of fun. Every single time I get to do Photoshop, I'm going to do this. You are going to save this workspace that you've just spent all this time making. So to do that, you come up to the window menu, down to Workspace, and down to New Workspace. And let go, and a screen will come up, and you name this. And name this something meaningful. I call this Retouching, and I'm going to call this, I've got so many of these, I'm going to call this Retouching 7. You can just call yours Retouching, or you can call it Retouching and add your name to it. You can do any of that kind of stuff, whatever. It doesn't really matter, whatever. You can actually hit Save. Then define this thing so that you can use it again whenever you're on the machine you just built this on. If you come up to Window, down to Workspace, it'll be sitting somewhere in here. You can see mine's right here is Retouching 7. If you want to save that workspace, which a lot of people would recommend you doing, because if you put this on a thumb drive or on a hard drive, you can load this workspace into any version of Photoshop anywhere in the world, and you'll immediately have this workspace without building access to it. To find it, you go out to the Finder. In the Finder, there's something that's hidden from you. So if you click on your Go menu and you get this drop-down tab right here, do you guys see the word Library in this drop-down? You do? Wow. And usually you don't. Apple hid this thing by design. Apple figured that there's too much dangerous shit in here, so they didn't want people having access to it. So you had to do a keyboard shortcut to get access to it. In the old days, you would hold down the Option key and it would show it to you. That doesn't work anymore. And I'm now in version 10.12 of system software. But if you hold down the Shift key, you'll see that Library shows up. So if you guys already have Library, it doesn't matter. Simply click on it. We are now in the library. You can tell we are because it's in this little tab right up here. Yep. So then try holding the Option key. Option key, again, older system. So the Option key, either way, get to it. Once you get to it, the easier thing to do from this point on, because I will get stuff out of the library all the time, is simply then take the icon at the top. Look at my screen where I'm talking about right here. Take this little icon up here that looks like a folder that says library. Take that and drag it over here into your favorites and let go. And the library will stay over here for the rest of your life. You're clicking on the little tab guy up here. It may not move because you may need administrative access to do this, because this is, you are fundamentally changing system here. Yours worked? Yeah, did you click on the blue guy? Not the name library, but okay. Okay, fine. So, fine. So, in the library, I need you to scroll all the way down to Preferences. So, there's a Preference pane, and then there's Preferences. You want to click on Preferences. That will open up a folder for you. I've dragged mine to the side so I can read these names a little bit better. You are looking then for Adobe Photoshop CC 2018 settings. You'll notice if you look at my screen, I've got settings that go all the way back to Adobe Photoshop 6.0. But you're looking for, because we are working in 2008, that's where you would want to look for this. So inside of Photoshop 2008 CC, Adobe Photoshop CC 2008 settings, if you scroll down to the very bottom of that, you will see Workspaces and Workspaces Modified, two different folders. Where do you think they would put the one that you just made? You would think they would put it in Modified, right? Because you just modified it. They don't. It doesn't go in Modified. It goes in Workspaces, and it's sitting right here. It's this Retouching, in my case, 7.psw. If you drag that guy to your hard drive and your jump drive or whatever, forevermore, all you need to do is navigate back to this folder, drop your copy of that in there, and it will be available to you forevermore. Crowd goes wild. Good job. Okie dokie. We're going to do a quick rundown of a couple of settings that we need to check to make sure we have correctly in here, especially for, well, this is especially for everybody. So we're going to get through that part of it. It'll be the perfect time then to take a break, and then we'll come back and we will actually work on images in Photoshop. So believe it or not, it's only taken us a full class and a half to get to the point in the class that you guys thought we probably should have been starting at day one, class 1, minute 1. But we have arrived, or we will have. All right, so anyway, a couple things to have set. Just to make things, I'm going to give you some suggestions. Most of the suggestions that I'm going to give you, you should follow. If you, for some reason, have a compelling reason not to, I'll point that out. You're welcome to do whatever you want to do. All I, in the end, care about is that you follow the sort of workflow that I'm going to lay out for you in the second part of our class. But some of the things to set up in here are really pretty critical. So either make notes of this stuff right now, or watch the video that's the recording of this that I'll post up, either tonight or tomorrow morning. So the first thing, to get to the preferences, you need to click on the Photoshop menu and come down to Preferences. You'll get a flyout menu that says General, which is what I want you to pick. You can pick any of these preferences individually, but if you click on General, it will give you a screen that allows you to set all the preferences in Photoshop. So there's a couple of things in here. The majority of this we're going to leave at its default. There are a couple of things in here that we are going to reset. And the first thing that we're going to reset, for me anyway, is this right here by default. This Show Start Workspace when no documents are open. I uncheck that. The reason I uncheck that is because it causes Photoshop, if it's checked, by default it is checked, it opens up with Adobe showing you, yet again, another place to buy their stock photography or to spend more money on them. And that is an insult to me. That is Adobe fucking spamming, cramming, somehow getting their way, their greedy little paws into my life every time I open up Photoshop if I haven't opened a file, and I resent it. I hate everything about it, so I uncheck that. Do you know how I feel about that now? The next thing that I have is this Use Legacy New Document Interface. Now, for those of you who have been working in Photoshop for quite some time, this simply returns you to the new box. Again, now in those newest versions of CC, when you click on New, you get another place to buy Adobe stock or more shit from Adobe, and no real useful setup to build a new document. If you click on this Use Legacy one, you will then experience what I always use. It's been the working interface forever, and it gives you more tools. That's all I can say. More tools with less options to buy shit from Adobe. I do click on this beep when done, and some of the files we work in this class, maybe they won't creep that big, but in the files that I typically work on in my own work, I can easily get to a 2 or 3 gigabyte file, and running a blur filter on a 3 gigabyte file can take 10 minutes. So if you click on this beep when done, Adobe will, it's just like an alarm. It'll go off and let you know that it's done. It's a nice thing to have. I uncheck Export Clipboard. By default, this is checked. It's a huge, huge memory hog. And nobody, and I mean nobody, uses the clipboard to export anything out of Photoshop. So it's pointless to have this on here. It'll only suck up memory. The rest of this you can leave at its defaults. The next thing down, if you click on the left-hand side of the preferences, we'll go to Interface. In Interface, this is where you can actually change the surrounding area of Photoshop. So if you like the white version, you can go for it. Most people will stick with the dark gray or the even darker version of it. You will find that in terms of judging tonal scale, these darker versions are much, much, much better to do that kind of work with. But again, as a photographer, that's important to you. But as a scientist who's looking at scans from an electron microscope, they may not care about that. They might prefer to have it white like this because it shines on their pretty face. I don't know why. Anyway, I'm just going to leave it here at its default. The rest of this stuff you can leave at default. If you find the type in Photoshop too small, you can actually change it by clicking on this. This doesn't change the size of type you would use in images. This changes the size of the font used in the interface. Show channels in color, you would definitely not want that turned on. The rest of this you can leave as it is. The next one down is Workspace. In Workspace, now this is again a personal preference. By default, open documents as tabs and enable floating document window docking. Those are both turned on. For me, I do an enormous amount of compositing, and I have usually multiple images open, and I need to see the content of those images at the same time. What Open Documents as tab does, it gives you tab behavior, and everybody in this room knows tab behavior. It's the same thing you have in all browsers now. You always have tabs, that kind of stuff. It'll do the same thing. So if I open 2 images in Photoshop, one of them will sit there as a tab when you'll see the other image, but the other one will just be a tab. If you click on the tab, it becomes the visible image, and the one that you were looking at then becomes the tab itself. It's just that back and forth part. For me, I'm constantly having to fight that because, again, I need to see my images at the same time. If you like tab behavior, keep it. Don't uncheck this. For me, I'm always going to uncheck it. So if you want your screen to look like mine does when we're doing this sort of work, uncheck these things. That's what's going on. The other thing that says enable floating document window docking, what that means is that as you drag an image that up here close to the top of your screen, a second image or a third image or whatever, it will then automatically offer to become a tab for you. So it's just a way to redock stuff. For me, I leave both of those off. I'm going to go the next thing down to Tools. In Tools, you can actually leave all of this at its defaults. The history log, there's no reason for you guys to get into history log until you get to my retouching class. For file handling, you can leave this part at its default. For export, you can leave that at its default. For performance, the one thing I want to make sure that you guys have on here is that history states is set to 50. Is that true for you guys? Okay, The other thing I want to mention, for those of you who have done a lot of Photoshop work already, have any of the people who have done Photoshop work, have you ever been working on a file and all of a sudden you start to get these like either black or white mosaic squares on your image? Does that happen to anyone? Okay, well, if it hasn't happened to you, then I'm not going to worry about it. Other than that, you can leave the rest of it at its default. We are not going to change scratch. No, the RAM is something completely different. No, if you had that problem, you would usually they've traced the problem down. It's the graphics processor. It's using the graphics processor, which is on by default. But most computers now are relatively new. Relatively new. Relative is a word. As relative is relative. Uh, this has not been a problem for a few years now. And again, most people are not working on computers. It would be circa 2010, probably. If you are and you do have that problem and you don't remember how to get rid of it, again, so what you'll see is it almost looks like they look like mosaic squares. You will see all of a sudden a perfectly little white square in the middle of your image. And sometimes you'll get multiple ones of them. Sometimes they flip and they go black. Sometimes they move around. It's just and you know you've got a problem. It's not your image. It's this. The RAM setting here, I'm going to suggest you guys just leave it at its default, which is usually 70%. Mine is bumped up to 80% because I have more RAM. But you can overdrive this, and if you overdrive it too much, you'll run into real problems. So for the time being, I'm going to leave it at its default. Again, if you get to me in retouching, we will talk about possible changing this and why you might want to change these. Scratch discs, I'm going to leave that at its default. The last one that we're going to change, two last things here. Cursors, we are going to change, so I need you to click on cursors. Then I need you to select normal brush tip. And I also need you to select show crosshairs in the brush tip. That'll give you a cursor that looks like this. It's very precise and targeted, which is what we want. I'm also going to ask you to change this by default is set to standard, but the other cursors to precise. You may love the little eyedropper, but nobody uses it, so I'm going to ask you to change the precise. It's just far more precision oriented in terms of the work we do here. And then finally, the last thing down here, which we will probably get to, I think, in this class, can't swear to it, but I think we will, is the transparent warning color, the gamut warning color. By default, it is a middle gray. I want you to click on that middle gray. You'll get a color picker that actually opens up. In that color picker, I want you to set the value next to the R at the bottom to 0. I want you to then select the green palette, the green dialog box. Type in 255 for green, and then for the blue one, the B, set that to 0 as well. That gives you a pure green color. By definition, this is a pure green color in Photoshop. And then click OK to that, and it'll be this fluorescent green color. Yeah. Okay, so do you have gamut warning? Do you see gamut warning? Okay, click on that, and a dialog box will open up. You can actually drag across the R value to select it. Type 0. If you hit the tab key, it'll take you to green. Type in 255. Hit the tab key again to go to blue and type in 0, and you should have a pure green color there, and say OK. Did that work? Okay. Finally, we can say OK to this. There's one last thing that we need to change, and it's in many ways, oddly, the most important thing, and it is a preference by all definition, but it's not in the preference menus. Don't ask me why, but at any rate, if you take nothing away from this class tonight about getting this set up, this is the most important thing to take away is this guy right here. So up to the edit menu, down to color settings. So look up at my screen, see where I'm at. It's going to take us 5 minutes to get through this, and we'll take a break, I swear to God. So this window comes up. By default, in Photoshop land, I'm going to change what it ships with. By default, there's a series of canned settings up here. So these are just these are saved groups of settings. By default, North American General Purpose 2 is what Adobe Photoshop ships with. Now, again, we haven't gotten into a lot of color theory right now, but I am going to say to you guys that working in sRGB is a mistake for the work that you're going to be doing as a photographer. Now, sRGB is a color space. It's actually a physical space, three-dimensional space that is relatively close to what a color inkjet printer will print out. Now, for all of you guys who've done any printing at all, whether it was in Lightroom or not, you probably are aware of the fact that you can see a much larger range of color, a certainly more saturated color on a monitor than you can get on a printer, right? Your camera can capture a much larger set of color than a printer can print. So for us, it's always a compromise. How big of a space do we want to work in? sRGB is too small of a space for us to work in. So we're going to pick a different space. We're actually going to work in Adobe RGB. How many people in this room know that they are working in Adobe RGB?
Like on your camera?
No, not you, your camera setting would be something different, but never mind. Forget that question. We'll talk about that later. Some people are aware of a profile called Prophoto Rgb, which is actually really large. We're gonna do this is gonna be like the Three Bears here, guys. We're going after there's Mama Bear. No, there's Three Bears. Who's the one in the middle? Never mind. Anyway, we're not using sRGB. That's all I'm going to suffice it to say. The problem is that Photoshop ships with sRGB selected. However, even worse, there's a whole series of color warnings that exist down here that are turned off by default, all of which is a huge mistake. So to fix this, you want to click on this drop-down menu and you want to come down to North American Pre-Press 2. When you do that, it will change your color RGB space to Adobe RGB, which is what we want. It will maintain all of your profiles, and it will also give you all of these possible color profile mismatch warnings, which we want, so that if you try to do something that is going to harm your file, you get a dialog box that pops open and says, "You're getting ready to harm your file. Are you sure you want to do this?" By default, that what Photoshop ships with, you don't get those dialog warnings. Instead, you just fuck up your file and you don't know you've done that until it's too late. Are we good on this? And then finally, click and say OK to that, and we are good to go. So I've got 8:05. If you guys could be back at 8:20, that would be great. Are there any questions about this? Are we good?